más adelante lo que estoy haciendo. En América puedo hacer esto, hablar japonés, pero como todos ustedes entender japonés, tengo que utilizar un lenguaje diferente. No hablo inglés en caso de que está preocupado de que su comprensión de inglés es malo. Right? So you all understand English, right? Is it okay so far? I would like people to tell me, what are you feeling at the moment? What are you feeling right now?
Yeah. Hungry.
Hungry? Okay, you would be in the mindful person. What are you feeling right now? Okay, that's okay. It seems that you're having a hard time. So I don't want you to think about it. I just want to know, how do you feel? So when I do this at Stanford, I usually begin. I wear a kimono and I walk into the room, first class, and I start to speak in Japanese. And then I see the faces, and people are looking very confused. And then sometimes the students get up and they walk out. And then sometimes they come back. And I say, what were you doing? They said, I was checking my iPhone to make sure I'm in the right classroom. Because I didn't know that I signed up for the Japanese class. I thought this was psychology class. And then I go around with the microphone and I say, how do you feel? And they say, oh, I'm frustrated because I don't understand. I don't know what's going on. And I say, well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you to be more like this dog. And if you think of what a dog is like, this is my dog, whose real name is Duke, but I call him Du-chan. And he's, I think, very mindful. So mindful is a word that comes originally from Asia, but it's being introduced. This book just came out last month in Japan, and you see it's introduced by a katakana word, right? Mindful, as if it doesn't really have a good translation in Japanese. But it's become extremely popular in the United States, and I'll explain why. But mindful means, if you think of a dog, is the dog thinking about the past? Is a dog thinking about the future? My dog always seems to be thinking right about this moment, right? And living fully in this moment, which is something that we as human beings do not do very well. Right? We're always thinking about something from the past, or we're thinking about ahead to the future, or we're distracted. We're thinking about so many things, but rarely we're not thinking about what is right in front of us, this present moment. And so that if you think of that as mindful, that's like this one-chan here, but human beings are more mindful, right? The mind is full of so many thoughts, right? And you're thinking about everything except what is happening in this present moment. So I'm trying to help people to be focused, present on this moment. And these are some of the most common English words to describe what does it mean by mindful. Awake meaning not just physically awake, but in the heart, as if your kokoro is awake, your mind is awake. The psychologists, we say that only a very small percentage of our mind is really awake. Normally we are almost like as if we are asleep. We're not awake to what's really happening, or aware of what's really happening, or giving our full attention to what's really happening. Accepting means that idea of kind of ukeire, the sense of accepting that this is what my life is at this moment. This is the reality of life right now. I'm not You're not outside somewhere, you're not by a beautiful beach, you're not in the middle of the forest, you're not at a nice restaurant, you're right here. And you accept it. This is where I am in my life. And you feel at peace with that. This is what life is. Or you have a kind of kansha no kimochi. You appreciate that that's where you are. And the roots of mindfulness are, of course, from meditation, right? Meiso. It comes from very deep religious traditions in which people would sometimes meditate for very long periods of time. Right? Go to somewhere, get isolated, and spend a lot of time meditating to achieve knowledge, to really understand, deep understanding. Mindfulness is based in these kinds of roots, but it's come to have a very meaning more to bring yourself into the present moment. So this idea of ima koku ni iru shunkan o kanjiru. Appreciating the fullness of the present moment, bringing your heart, your whole self into that present moment. I'll go back to this in a minute. But the other word I wanted to introduce is the word vulnerability. So this is the word that I use a lot in my psychology classes to teach about the importance of global skills. What I wanted to make you feel was vulnerable. In other words, you don't know what's going on. So you expect something to happen, but it doesn't. Something else happens, and it creates vulnerability in you. I don't know what's going on. I don't feel comfortable, right? Something's happening, but I don't understand what's happening. And vulnerability is usually thought of as a weakness. Right? We thought of this as it's a weakness in human beings. But recent psychology theory is vulnerability is a strength. So if you can be vulnerable, you have opened yourself to new learning. Something can come in if you create the space. And the space is created by this ability to say, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. And therefore, I want to know. I can receive the knowledge. So this is extremely important when we experience something new. And whenever we go to a new culture, meet a new person, it's an opportunity for vulnerability and opening ourselves to a new kind of learning. And vulnerability is also related to this idea of perfection. Right? So the kampeki shugi, the idea that we have to be perfect before we can do anything. And so I always tell the Stanford students, imperfect is perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try your best. And this is, I think we'll have time later, but Steve Jobs made this statement after he was fired by Apple. He said he was fired by the company that he started. And at first he felt very defeated by that and had very negative feeling. But later he looked back and he said that was the best thing that happened to him. He entered the most creative period of his life because he became vulnerable. He realized, oh, look at me, I'm a failure, I made a mistake. But then he opened up. He says, okay, now I have the lightness of being a beginner again. And this comes from Zen Buddhism, right? The idea of the, what's it called, Shoshin, right? The new, fresh beginner's heart, beginner's mind. And that is what makes people free to learn. So at Stanford now, there's a big effort to tell students it's good to make mistakes, and it's good to fail, because you learn so much about life from your failure. And so sometimes we use Steve Jobs as a way to talk about that idea of being a failure. But mindfulness has become extremely popular now in the United States. This is from last year's Time magazine cover. So big that it's called a revolution. It's changing the world. And the reason it's so popular is because of what they're describing here. We live in a stressed out, multitasking culture. It means we're very rarely focused on the present moment. We're always somewhere else. And often many places at the same time, because young people know how to do things now with technology, and technology is always right in our hand. So we're always multitasking, our mind is always scattered, and we're extremely stressed out by the pace of life today. And so now we have this new science that's helping us to find focus, and it's called, mindfulness is the most popular term that's used for it. And where I live, in the heart of the Silicon Valley, right, you all know that these places are all there. The Googles, the Facebooks, Yahoo, Apple, Adobe, Cisco, eBay, all of them are right in this Silicon Valley. And all of them have mindfulness. So they have people there training their employees in mindfulness. And so right in the workplace, they emphasize that this is extremely important for the health of their employees, health of the workers, but also for the health of the company. They know that the company is going to do better if the workers are mindful, and so they teach them how to be mindful at work. But I'm not, my work is mostly at the university, and when 10 years ago I was a professor at Tokyo University, and I took what they call Kaigai Kenshu, so a 10 months visiting professor at Stanford University. But I never came back because I was seduced by the beautiful climate and the beautiful campus, and it was just such a lovely place, to raise children. I had 2 small boys at the time, and I'd love to see them playing on the grass fields in California, and the wine was good, and the fruits and vegetables were good, and then Stanford offered me a house, and the house meant there's a system in Stanford called resident fellow. It means that a faculty could live in a house that's attached to a student dormitory. And so every day I would eat my lunch and my dinner with the students. And the students, I got to see them on a daily basis. I got to see them intimately, what their life was really like, not like what they showed me in the classroom, but what was their life really like. And many of the students would say, well, in the classroom I show a very good face, but when I go back to my room, the real me comes out. And so I encountered all these problems when I was in this house at Stanford. Eating disorders, especially among the girls, the kashokusho, kyoshokusho, all kinds of eating disorders, depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, violent behavior. There were suicides, murder. One of my students killed his father when I was there. Manic depression, soetsubyo, schizophrenia. And schizophrenia, seishin bunetsubyo. And this was really kind of a shock to me to see this so close, because I had been raised by many people. I had been at these very elite places. I had spent 10 years at Harvard. I spent about, oops, excuse me, let me get some music going here. Kind of distracting. But I had been raised from a very early age to believe that that success was something that if you went to the right universities, then your life would be successful. And I spent about 10 years at Harvard and 10 years at Todai. Now I've been at Stanford about 10 years. But I was raised really to believe in this myth that success and happiness in life was a very simple path. You first go to a good yochien. And so I thought that was true. So this is Komaba Yochien, and my son, I'm putting him in Komaba Yochien, because I thought if you go to a good yochien, you go to a good shogakko, and then maybe a good chugakko, and then all the way to a good university. And if you graduate from a good university, you'll get a good job. So I got a job at Todai. And if you get a good job, maybe you can make a good marriage. So I got a good marriage. And if you have a good marriage, you have good kids. I had a couple of good kids. But I also realized that was something missing from this formula when I saw that how much the suffering there was in the students at Stanford. And then I realized it was all across the nation in the United States. And this is a national survey of the kinds of problems that the young people are feeling when they're college students. 1 of every 4 students has a mental disorder. Almost unbelievable. 30% report depression, 50% report anxiety. And in Japan, I think there's a belief that Americans very easily go for counseling. And it's true among a part of the population, but then there's this whole part of the population that does not go for counseling. And of course, America is a very diverse society, and many people are coming from a cultural background that is not Western European, and for them, counseling is not something that is a normal thing to do. So half of the college students don't seek help, even when they feel they have a problem. This one was very impressive to me. 80% feel overwhelmed by the demands of their studies. And of course, you know that American colleges are more demanding in terms of how much they demand of the students. And certainly at a place like Stanford, it's extremely demanding. But to think that 80% feel overwhelmed by the stress was kind of shocking to me. Half of them feel hopeless, and some of them even considered suicide. So it's really a national problem. And at Stanford, we use what we call the duck syndrome. So the duck meaning that when the students are outside and we see them in the classes, they look like that. And they look very good, very peaceful. And I don't know how I guess it's because a lot of them are wealthy, but they're very attractive students. They're, very few students are overweight, and they're very beautiful. And so they look wonderful, and they're all smiling. And underneath the water, they're not. It's a whole different picture of what's happening inside them. And they say that they actually feel more pressure because they think they should be happy. In other words, they feel this pressure, like they feel like they can't complain. Because when they say anything, the parents ask, how are you feeling? Oh, not too good. Why? How could you not be happy? You got into Stanford. It's the most beautiful climate in the world. You know, it's sunshine and happiness, and you should just be happy. What's wrong with you? Why are you not grateful for what you have? And so they say they feel worse because they feel they have to show this happy face on the outside when really they don't feel that happy. So we call it the duck syndrome, which is something that we try to pay attention to what's happening under the water. So this is kind of the kikake for the way that I was able to begin a new program at Stanford, which I call mindful education at Stanford. And as you know, Stanford is a very wealthy university, so they allow me to limit the classes to this size. They're limited to 15 students, and so they're run as a seminar. Any student can join it, but as you can see, it tends to be the minority students often take it. The students who feel somewhat out of place. They sometimes feel that there's an image of a typical Stanford student, but they feel they don't fit that image. And so they're looking for a place to express who they really are. They have this very nice building right in the middle of campus called the Harmony House, which is just an old wooden house. And this is just like a living room, and it's full of sofas. And so that I can have my class, we sit in a circle, and we hold the class there. But the basis of the class is, which the content varies. I offer some as psychology classes, some are offered as cultural anthropology, some are offered in what's called human biology. That's the second most popular major at Stanford after computer science is #1, and then second is human biology. And mostly they're going to become to medical school. So as you know, in the United States, first you have to go 4 years college, graduate, and then go to 4 years of medical school. So most of those students are in human biology, and they take my classes too about, which I call medical humanities. So it's about the whole part of medicine that is not technology, and it's about patient care and about listening to patients and things, ethical decisions making in medicine. And so they have these classes, small classes of 15 students. And the reason I'm able to offer these classes is because of this marriage. I mean, they're not legally married, but they're married, which you can do in California, 2 men. But those 2 are not married. This is the Dalai Lama, right, on the left. And this is Richard Davidson on the right, who is probably the leading neuropsychology researcher. So he's the guy who does the research that gives evidence to the world that what the Dalai Lama is saying is true. So it's the marriage of really religion, spiritual tradition, and science. And the marriage goes back to the 1970s at Harvard when Dr. Benson invited this meditator into his laboratory and started to put electrodes on his head and started to get evidence that what people were saying about meditation was true, that the benefits that it gave were true. But he couldn't publish it about meditation at the time because Americans don't like the word meditation. So they're afraid of it because partly for religious reasons. So they think that it's not Christian. And so many Americans, of course, are Christians, and they think meditation sounds like Buddhism, maybe Hinduism, but it's certainly not Christian and it's not American. So he couldn't call it meditation at the time. It's changing, of course, but this is the 1975 when this book came out. And it was the first time to teach about meditation to the public, and the first time they were getting evidence in the medical world about what was the positive effects of mindfulness. Now the research has just gone, there's so much of the research that has been done in university laboratories, and it shows all these positive effects of what is called mindfulness. So the greater attention, right, that people can focus their attention, they can focus on the subject matter. So because of this research, when I went to the psychology department at Stanford, I could say, we have the research that proves that if we teach mindfulness, then all these positive results will come. So the attention, the focus on the subject matter, the students focus on others. This one was a little surprising to them. The focus on others. And so the students often say that what was introduced in Japan as EQ, right, emotional intelligence, is 4 parts, but the one part is self-understanding, right, and another part is social understanding. And so from the mindfulness, they all say, I feel more self-aware, I have more self-understanding, but they also say, I have more social understanding. So in other words, when they feel, after mindfulness, they feel, I understand someone else better. And it's this sense of empathy or omoyari. They feel more understanding of what another person is feeling. Cognitive capacities are enhanced, the ability to think, thinking abilities, retention of what you learn. You know, so this was such an easy sell in the sense, when I had all this research that says, this is, if I do mindfulness, look at all the class is going to be so much better. Right? Students are going to retain knowledge, they're going to be thinking better, they're going to be integrating their learning better, and they're going to be more flexible thinking. And this is one of the things that I think is especially important in Japanese education, is the ability to think flexibly. And this is one of the things that Americans always criticize about Japanese. They say Japanese are not flexible thinkers. So in other words, when you get into let me give you one example. So this English guy I know, about 6'8", Kinpatsu, is sitting on the train next to a mother and a daughter. And he turns to the little boy and he says, "Atsui ne." And the little boy goes, and he turns to the mother and he says, "Maka-san, igo ga wakaranai yo." Get it? So the English guy has spoken in Japanese, but the girl looks at his face and sees this gaijin face, and in the mind is thinking, oh, twists it completely so he spoke English. And she totally believes that he spoke English. And this sounds silly. I've seen it so many times. It's amazing, you know, to think that the brain works like that. But it's something that, you know, for a child it's okay, but when you start encountering adults who do that, then it gets very frustrating. And Americans become very critical. And they say, why are Japanese so rigid? How come their brains don't switch quicker, you know, to say, I'm speaking Japanese, hello? Why can't you understand I'm speaking Japanese? It's not English. So this idea that flexible thinking is enhanced is also something that's very encouraging for me to think that it's good to teach in terms of global skills. And these are also something that is extremely, makes it important for global skills. The idea that you become open to new information. So that goes back to that whole idea of the Zen, the Buddhist idea of the beginner's mind and vulnerability, that you become much more open to new information and aware of multiple perspectives. So the idea that the way you're seeing it is just one way of seeing something, and to realize that, oh, that other person sees it very differently. And that's, of course, the extremely necessary skill in any kind of global context, that you recognize that the way you see it is not the way other people see it. And to therefore want to be open to that and say, oh, please tell me, how do you see the world? Because I need to understand that. And so you're open to that, you're aware of that possibility, that really exists. Alertness to distinction, so the differences and all that. And so what is happening in the university world is that there are people like this, who's a Stanford professor, who are doing these scientific studies. And so they're producing results from the scientific studies that are extremely similar to what is called traditional wisdom. So if you look at the English in these two statements here, it's a little bit small, but I'll read it. The results show that acts designed to improve the well-being of others will lead to greater happiness for givers. So that acts designed to improve the well-being of others simply means giving. So if you give something to other people, it brings greater happiness to you. Anybody knows it's traditional wisdom. So that's exactly what the Dalai Lama is saying. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. Now the second part is the same, right? Is what she was saying. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And compassion in this sense means giving to somebody else. So giving, and it's very much the same as this. Right? But when you propose to a university that I will teach this, then they say, no, you can't do that. Or you maybe do that in the religion department. You teach, this is what the Dalai Lama says. But you can't do it in general. I can do this in psychology now, which is, Stanford is one of the most conservative psychology departments. But because there's research like this is a very mainstream journal, and she's doing very mainstream social psychology, they call social experimental research in a laboratory with clear measurements. And that shows, they measure something like stress levels, and show that the stress level increases or decreases, or they get a test that measures something called happiness. And they get results with numbers, and then they can have proved, or at least provided evidence, that this really works. So I can do this in all my classes. And I can also do this because there's a whole climate change represented by this building, which is right in the heart of the Stanford campus. Somebody last year donated $4.5 million so they could have their name on this building. So this is really popular now in Stanford, to donate lots of money and make a building and put your name on the front of the building. So Mr. Windover gave Stanford $4.5 million and built this building right in the middle of the campus, which is simply a place where you can go to meditate and to be in silence. And it's a very simple, there's some huge abstract paintings in it, but otherwise it's almost empty. There's benches, there's a little water fountain over here to facilitate the meditative state. But otherwise it's just an empty space. There's a garden outside, a pool, and so the classroom I showed you a little while ago is just about 3 minutes walk from the Contemplation Center. So we meet in the classroom, and I say, now let's walk in silence to the Contemplation Center. We go there and we begin with about 20 minutes of meditation. And so I teach them how to meditate, some basics of meditation. Then they go there and I let them do whatever they want. Some of the football players they're so tired that they lay on the floor. But nobody sleeps, but they all rest in some way, in their own way. And I said, don't worry about if you're doing it good enough, and gradually you'll learn how to do it. So the other thing that's very different about what I do is that at Stanford there are many professors who study things like this, mindfulness, but in the class time they simply talk about it. They talk about it or they analyze it, and then they have these what they call rational, logical,